Should sheriffs withhold judgment from enforcing laws? What can the US learn from history in our response to Iran? And is Hamas a bigger threat to the US than the corporate press? We answer these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds to find the most interesting takes, and we like to critique them or praise them for what they do right or wrong. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host Britt. As a reminder, if you follow us on socials, we appreciate it. You can find us at Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on Twitter and YouTube, and leave a comment and a like and all that good stuff on the video, and leave a review for the podcast if you're listening that way. Helps us out a ton. Without further ado, we'll get into our first take here. And this one is an X post with an image of someone in, I assume this is Linwood, Washington, but it could be Linwood, California too.
Snohomish County, Linwood, Washington.
Okay, yeah. So this is Washington, and a dude is post a picture with him holding a sign that is sort of a campaign sign where he's giving a big thumbs down. The campaign sign reads, "Fortney said he wouldn't enforce some COVID safety laws or gun laws. He's not supposed to choose which laws to enforce." So that's the sign he's holding. And then he has the accompanying post. "I was counter-protesting a rally for Adam Fortney for sheriff in Linwood today. When Fortney showed up and asked me a question about my sign, 'What did you want me to do? Arrest people?' And I replied, 'It's more about promoting the idea that it's up to a sheriff to decide whether a law is constitutional or not. Sheriffs aren't judges.' I think that sums up the problem. The problem wasn't that he just wasn't arresting people for gathering, since, as he said, nobody else was either. It's that he was, one, openly encouraging people to be contemptuous of COVID safety rules, and two, positioning himself as the authority to decide whether a law is constitutional or not. That's a judge's job." All right, Britt, you're a Snohomish man. What?
Yeah, I am. I am a Snohomish man. I filled out our ballots yesterday, and I had seen a lot of signs. Adam Fortney is the sheriff in Snohomish County. He was elected in 2019, and he, I think anyone who listens to this podcast knows, like, I'm not the biggest fan of the policing system. And everything that entails. But if you are going to have a policing system, you want them to at least be loyal to the Constitution and what they deem it to be so, and then to have reasons for why they would or would not enforce stuff. And he was fairly good in Snohomish on stuff during the entire COVID-19 pandemic and all of the draconian stuff that came down from Jay Inslee. So, for example, he would not shut down businesses if they wanted to stay open when Inslee was saying that businesses, that weren't deemed essential needed to be shut down. And then he also signed on when various gun laws that restricted like magazine capacity and like whether you could own certain types of AR-15s or other types of rifles. He signed on saying that he would not enforce those laws either, which I really appreciated and really liked. I did not know any of that about him until, and I'm saying I appreciate it after I started getting calls from his opponent and then seeing posts like this on Twitter or X. And I was like, oh, like, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. I don't really want to vote for, the lesser of two evils. But then I was like, well, this guy actually seems like he's pretty good. So I enthusiastically voted for him. So ironically, Bennett Hazelton's counter protest created an Adam Fortney supporter to me. Again, there's other things that he does because he's a cop that I'm not the biggest fan of. But I think that cops should be, like, we want cops to be moral people, right?
Right.
And judges, we want judges to be moral people as well, but judges take a long time to do anything. That's kind of the great secret of how all of these political mechanisms function to, like, suppress people and hurt people. Like, when Joe Biden signed the COVID-19 vaccination mandate that said, hey, if you're a business and you have over 100 people or you do business with the government, all of your employees have to be vaccinated or we're going to fine you $14,000 per employee per month. He had no constitutional right to do that, but it was enforced until a judge ruled on it. And what sucks is that it takes like months for that to occur at the quickest. And so in that month's time, businesses are forced to, because they don't know whether it's going to be ruled one way or the other, they're forced to adapt to save their business. And so millions of people were fired or put into a position where their jobs were in question about whether they would be able to stay or not. Or they were pushed into making a medical decision that they might otherwise not have made simply because they felt pressured to. So a judge is not the end all be all. Businesses that stood up to that, I mean, the Daily Wire was a very public one that stood up to it, so we're not going to do it, and they can fine us. And it turned out, a couple months down the line that the Supreme Court ruled that, hey, this is actually not constitutional and it can't be enforced. And so that worked out great for the businesses that were able to stand up for it. I would like that same type of moral fortitude for the people that are only allowed to use force, legally allowed to use force in our communities. And I've talked about this before. Like, I've had a cop, and this is in Snohomish County, so this is under Adam Fortney, and I don't particularly like it, but pull me over, give me a ticket for talking on my phone, or what he perceived I was talking on my phone. And he literally told me, he's like, yeah, I think the law is stupid, but I've got to enforce it. Well, that's the freaking Nuremberg defense. If you think a law is wrong or stupid, like, it's actually immoral for you to enforce it. It is against your own moral character and your own better judgment. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There is a constant line of contradiction that runs through a lot of people's heads. The line goes like, I think we should get rid of all guns except for the racist, bigoted cops to have them. Or, I think that all of Congress is corrupt, but I'm going to keep reelecting my congressman because they're good. And I think politicians are generally corrupt, but we need to enforce the laws on the books as they're written and use no discernment in enforcing them unless it's your express job. That is ridiculous to say that you should specifically have you should exercise no judgment in your job. That's clearly what he's saying. Now, like you brought up the Nuremberg defense, I think a really good way to see if a position is at least somewhat reasonable is to take it to the absurd conclusion. Now, of course, you can't do that you can't use that and justify your entire argument against it. But when you bring things to their extreme logical conclusion, that's a good way to test proof whether or not something seems flaky. And so when you run this through that, like, let's run it through the Holocaust, like saying, look, the problem isn't that, he wasn't arresting Jews for gathering, since, other people in the area weren't gathering Jews against him. It's that he was openly encouraging people to stand up for Jews and positioning himself as the authority to decide whether or not a Jew was a human or not. That's a judge's job. Like that's ridiculous. That would be a ridiculous assertion for you. And just in the same way that it would be ridiculous for you to look and see someone jaywalking because, like, their child ran out in the street, and they jaywalk, scoop up their child, and continue and go over to the other side. And then you'd be like, wow, that was, it's not my job to say whether or not that was a morally justified action. They're jaywalking. I'm actually going to put this person under citizen's arrest. Like, that would be a brain dead take to have. But according to Bennett, technically speaking, it's not my job to make a judgment. And if I have the power to enforce the law, oughtn't I do that? It's not a matter of whether or not someone uses judgment or discernment, because everyone does that. Every decision a person makes, they're exercising their judgment. It's just that in Bennett's mind, the moral framework is obey the letter of the law as prescribed by the people in power, and that is the higher moral framework than using your own judgment to say things like gathering in together is a constitutionally guaranteed right. Therefore, my moral position here is upholding people's individual rights as guaranteed by the Constitution. That doesn't have as high a framework in his mind as the letter of the law from the current people in power, like Jay Inslee. That is the only thing. And you can argue whether or not it's a better moral framework to uphold to the Constitution, whether it's a better framework to uphold to local law, or whether it's a better framework to uphold to human rights, right? Things that I would say are protected but not granted by government. And I think that that's always the best framework to operate based on. But even still, it's just funny because Bennett's saying, well, it's not his job to decide whether a law is constitutional or not. It's just to carry out the law. But the Constitution is the law, right? And so it kind of is the police officer's job in some respect to make that determination, to make that judgment, because a lot of the time there are contradictory laws. So you have to make those kinds of distinctions. The only difference is Bennett just wants to make sure that the cops do the least amount of prioritization possible and grant the most power to the people who are going to be the most tyrannical.
And people think that like which laws cops enforce, they already do decide which ones they're going to enforce. If you look through the law books in Washington or any state, there are crazy laws that are still in existence that can be enforced that cops just choose not to enforce. So really what is or is not enforced is determined by what the cops are willing to do. And if you think about a lemonade stand, everyone just lets a lemonade stand exist. But if a cop wanted to, they would have all the legal authority and a judge's backing, or a judge in the past backing, to go and shut down that lemonade stand for operating without a food handler's permit or license. But we don't do that because we know it's nonsensical. Yet for some reason, when it came to, let's shut down the entire county, or let's shut down the entire state, not let people operate, not let people go outside, force everyone to wear masks that don't work, and to get a shot that doesn't work. When we're faced with that type of absurd scenario, everyone's expected, well, you just got to follow the law. But they don't apply that type of reasoning to any of the other crazy laws that are on the books. And especially when something's in flux like this is the benefit of decentralized government, is that counties and cities, and ideally all the way down to individuals, can decide how they're going to operate given a certain type of crisis or situation. And we can now see how that all plays out. And that's the benefit of being one of Adam Fortney's slogans, which I really like, is don't make Snohomish Seattle. And it's yeah, we don't want to make Snohomish Seattle. And there's a reason why a lot of people have moved to Snohomish and choose to live out here, away from all the things that are going on in Seattle, and the policies that go on out there. And so if it's the will of the people in the county and it's the individual's decisions, and it kind of speaks for that, then it's a moral thing. I would love to see that, passed down, obviously, all the way down to the individual level. But the most we can do, and if we can get to the county, is the better.
The last thing that really irritates me about this take is in the last little bit here, he goes, it's not that he was openly encouraging people to be contemptuous of COVID safety rules. I'm sorry, excuse me. It's the problem wasn't that he was just arresting people for gathering, since, as he said, nobody else was either. It's that he was doing these other things. And to me, that gives away so much about this person, because why he is being so mad and why he is protesting isn't because of any actual real world effect that happened. He's not mad because Fortney specifically refused to gather up people in the real world and haul them off to real effect. He's not mad because there were gatherings of people and there was a disease spread. He's mad because the idea was wrong, because the theoretical, people were allowed to express opinion, and he doesn't like that, basically. Yeah. That is crazy. This is one of those things where I feel that our generation and a few, maybe the, Gen Xers, and maybe, probably just through Gen X, and Zoomers below us, we live in a world that is so far disconnected from reality, in that we don't, so many of us work, and I'm included in this, work in jobs where we do things that the value provided is not tangible. We're not working with a physical object to create value. We're not, we can do things that have effect, but it's usually by measure of a few steps between the process. And so you do things, you say things, ideas are exchanged, and then you get this money, because eventually, somehow down the line, things are made. And you don't really have the direct connection to how those things are being produced or made in the same way. And so, in his mind, he's outraged because the idea of Fortney not imposing these restrictions and not rounding people up is more offensive than the fact that he didn't actually round these people up. And that, to me, is wild. If this person was consistent, at the very least, he should say, I was really mad that he didn't gather, take these people who are gathering out and protect us from safety. But it's not about safety. It's about control, because he's mad about this theoretical, because he's like, yeah, nobody else was doing it either. But I'm mad at him because he was encouraging that kind of behavior through ideas. And so the fact of the matter is, if you were actually worried about the safety of COVID, you would be just as mad, if not more mad, that he wasn't physically throwing people in prison. And that would be the basis of your complaint, not this theoretical, he wasn't, giving into the idea of it. So that, to me, is wild, because, again, it just shows that it's kind of like the academics, problem, or maybe even some traditional conservatives who are like, well, we're mad about, using the power of government to curb government because we believe in the ideas of how we do that more and more, which there's some merit to, but to the point where you're mad more about the theoretical process than the end result, that's where the problem arises. And sometimes I think the process does matter because the end result will inevitably get worse because of the process. But when you're more mad about the process than you are the end result, and you take more care about the theoretical than the real, that's where I think you lose me a little bit, because we live in a real world. You should care about the effects of the real world.
Yeah.
Okay, our next take comes from Joshua Reed Eagle, and he tweets, liberating Palestine requires the elimination of Hamas. All right, what is this take in your eyes?
So taken at face value, it's not bad. It's true. Like Hamas makes it impossible for Palestine to be liberated because essentially all of the countries in the world and people in Israel see Hamas and think, well, that's all of Palestine. All the Palestinians are like that, and we can't give them a seat at the UN. We can't give them any sort of rights or voice or anything like that. The problem that I have with this take, though, is that like people like Joshua Reed Equal and some other Ben Shapiro and other types will use this as justification for the mass slaughter of innocent Palestinians that is occurring right now. I don't have any problem with the people that perpetrated the attacks on October 7th to be brought to justice and destroyed. And yes, they do take innocence into their own hands and try and use them as a shield and all that stuff. But a lot of people are okay with literally tens of thousands of people being killed and indiscriminately killed in this act. And it also kind of ignores the fact that like Hamas was created by the U.S. and Israel. There's literally video of Benjamin Netanyahu talking about how like, hey, it's actually good that we get extremists into power against the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip, because if we get extremists in there, no one is ever going to want to have them have a voice. No one's ever going to give them a seat at the table to discuss things. And we can kind of do what we want, and we can alienate Gaza away from the West Bank. And so Hamas has always been a useful tool for Israel to kind of enact their desires and will upon the Gaza Strip and kind of force the hand of the international community into not having any dealings with Gaza or putting any pressure, at least being neutral in any of the dealings that are occurring. So yeah, there can't be a liberated Palestine while there's Hamas there, and I think that's also the reason why Hamas is not being has not been destroyed and was created in the first place.
Yeah, I was going to say that this is one of those takes where the exact wording of it might be correct, but the broader interpretation is where the issue is a problem, right? For instance, it's like saying, I am pro-choice. It's like, okay, word for word, I would say, generally speaking, I am pro-choice in many things. The connotation of that, however, is not what it means. And so, to me, this is one of those things where the exact verbiage is maybe right. Like, there are a lot of innocent Palestinians who are suffering because of Hamas and their existence, and there are a lot of Palestinians who in order to be free, it would require a liberation or an elimination of Hamas in some respect, for sure. That does not mean that the U.S. foreign policy position should be, the only way to liberate Palestine is by bombing the crap out of it, and that's the issue that this take is. And I don't know his specific position on this or what U.S. policy should be, and that's the problem. This take doesn't even help me clarify it. It's one of those wishy-washy takes that it does more to have people read into it what they want to read into it than it does actually clarifying a position. If I want to be mad about this take, I could read into it and be mad about it. Yep. If I want to see, no, he's making a good point, I can see that too. It doesn't help. It doesn't help clarify the issue. It just obfuscates it by kind of stating a little bit of a truism that can be read either way. I mean, in some respects, it'd be like saying, the U.S. Liberating the United States people requires the elimination of the government. And it's like, that could be provocative, but I don't want calls for the international community to come in and bomb DC just because there's a lot of rotten people over there. And it's also, there's also like degrees between there, right? I think in the same way, in Palestine, it's a little bit more stark, but I also think that there are, liberating Palestine and, quote unquote, elimination of Hamas, it doesn't have to come in the ways that people are talking about it in the current day, in the current moment after the horrific attack of Hamas. Rooting out Hamas, the straightforward quote unquote way is going in guns a-blazing and blowing them up. The harder but maybe more like stable, long-standing way is to have it be rooted out from the community, from within, from Palestine, by removing the incentives for it to exist in many ways. And that's not a fun solution. It's not a clean solution, but it's also maybe one of the more stable ones, and also not one that's really implied in this, but it's also not excluded. So that's why I don't like this take, because it doesn't offer anything. It doesn't give you any real insight into the issue or a path forward, or it doesn't help clarify. It's not saying anything brave in the face of public sentiment. So I don't like this take, even if I might technically agree with some aspects of it. I think it's a bad take, only because it isn't doing anything valuable to help clarify or stake a position or contrast, or I don't know. To me, it's like it strikes me as the enlightened moderate, the radical middle kind of person who's like, well, I think that both sides have a point. That's like, okay, well, you're not bringing anything to the table unless you can elucidate me on this.
Yeah. Next take's similar, so.
Okay, great. We'll move on to our next take. This one comes from Liam McCollum, and he tweets, "The Iranian regime is evil and oppresses the people of that great country. But U.S. regime change will not produce better results. It didn't in 1953. We should stay the heck out." All right, what's your take?
It's a great take. And I like how simply put it is. And in the same way that I was talking about how, the United States went into the Gaza Strip in the early 2000s and said, hey, like, we want to enact democracy here. They also did that in other places, not just in the Gaza Strip, in Afghanistan and other places. Let's enact democracy, and maybe we'll kind of tip our hands on the scale one way or the other and get someone that's in there that is a little bit more friendly to the West. And all of it has always backfired. It's never done a good deal for the United States interest, nor for the people that are in the region. And it's very it's always interesting to me how economic principles that we have with human action and the natural flow of economics and capital throughout a system, and when you introduce extra variables into that shouldn't be present in there, usually from the government, it creates all these weird perverse incentives that create undesired outcomes. It's kind of like stepping on the butterfly after time traveling, and it creates just a complete alternate universe. In the same way, when we go and meddle in other countries, in cultures that we have no business being a part of, that we don't know anything about, and we're trying to change them to the way we think when we live all the way on the other side of the world and have developed in a completely different way with a different culture. It's like those things create other externalities as well, in the same way that government action at the top for economics creates weird externalities. What's unfortunate is that when we do it in other countries, it cascades into millions of people dying. And Scott Horton has this really fantastic series called Enough Already on YouTube. And it basically goes from the entire history of the United States involvement in the Middle East, from the 1953 revolution in Iran all the way to present day. And just how all of the madness of us, funding terrorists on one side, and then those terrorists blowing up our own guys on the other side with weapons that we gave to them, and vice versa, how that all started. And it's because someone made a mistake somewhere, meddling in some sort of problem that they didn't fully understand, with a one-size-fits-all solution that could never possibly fix everything. And so after they'd made that mistake, they're like, well, we're already out there, so we might as well just continue making mistakes, essentially. And you would think after 70 years of us doing this stuff, I mean, we've done it for a lot longer, but at least in the Middle East, significant involvement by the United States for 70 years, and just all the failures and deaths and blowback that has occurred, that we would think, well, maybe this time it's not going to be any different. Maybe it's going to be the same result. But for some reason, we seem prone to make the same mistake.
Yeah, I think that this this take at least makes a stand, unlike our last one, right? I think that this is the kind of perspective that we need to have in the wake of horrific attacks, where the common sentiment really is we can't do nothing. We have to do something. We can't just do nothing, right? That's always the impetus that goes on when it comes to things like 9/11, when it came to the Iranian Revolution, and it feels in very much like the hubris of a powerful nation that thinks it can make the world in its image. It can make humans behave as they will. And I don't know, it seems like anyone who's ever been in charge of a company, a project, anything that requires external humans you don't control to react a certain way. So whether you're trying to sell something and have people buy it, whether you're trying to make a video and have people watch it, anyone who's been in charge of that ever knows how unpredictable and how individual really people are in what they will do and how they will react to things. And so the hubris of thinking that not only can you do this to an entire nation, but you can interfere, you can meddle, you can do the right thing, quote unquote, assuming of course this was in the actual best interests, which it many cases is not, and then have things play out in such a way that it's just perfectly under your control. That will never just that will never stop amazing me, that people actually believe and think this way, that you can control on such a massive scale. And so I mean, just in the short point that you brought up, highlighting, we're fighting the terrorists using the weapons we gave, and they're using the weapons we gave them against us. That right there, just the fact that has happened not once, not twice, but a plurality of times, that should make us stop and think that maybe our foreign meddling policies don't go the way we always plan, and we need to be calm, collected, and cautious in engaging in this foreign affair. And so, yes, Iran can be evil. I don't love a lot of the Iranian government and what they're doing. I also don't think it's the kind of threat that people make it out to be. But let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that all of Iranian government, all of their motivations, and even the people of Iran, let's even assume that for a second, they're all evil. That does not mean that us going in there is going to have the desired outcome and effect. And it's just crazy that we're stepping into this again, because it's not even like we're in Ukraine and Russia where we're saying, look at the past, like we just did this, we just made these mistakes. It's like we made these mistakes in Iran, like he points out. It's not even a different place. It's literally the same thing we're trying to do again that we already did, and it already failed. And yet people just don't want to think about it. They just want to bury their head in the sand. I remember when I learned about this and whole thing in college, just having my mind blown. It was when I was starting to be non-interventionist, and this really was like one of the things that sealed the deal for me, where I'm like, it's not even like this is theoretically true. It's just literally historically true, but no one ever talks about it and no one ever teaches it. So this is the kind of perspective we need when there are heads rushing around saying we need to do something. It's like we did things and it really bit us back.
A lot of people will probably reply to this or counter it, that the people that want war in Iran, and they'll say, well, the difference is that the Iranians funded Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and then those attacks on October 7th resulted in 30 or 40 or however many it is now Americans being killed or taken hostage, and so therefore they are an aggressor on America, and we are at war with Iran. But what's funny is those same people would not use that same justification for saying that we are at war with Russia, because we are literally giving weapons and arms to Ukraine to fight Russia, but somehow we're not actually at war with Russia. And if Russia ever did anything, to counter that, like it would be this great catastrophe thing, like we're just doing humanitarian work. It's like you can't have it both ways. And that's what's one of the funny parts about the Ukrainian conflict and the Gaza conflict with Iran all being happening at the same time, is that like you get both leftists and the right saying simultaneously things that contradict themselves, and then like these weird war hawks that want war in both cases, but they want it on their terms, which is we want to just have money being poured into Ukraine and using the Ukrainians as meat shields, but we also want to be able to put boots on the ground in Iran, all for different or the same reasons that contradict themselves. And so it's like you don't even have to really like take like that in and of itself is just like a signal and a sign of how U.S. foreign policy in regards to all of this stuff has been carried out. It's contradictory. It doesn't make any sense. It has no logical conclusion, and it doesn't actually have a mission that can be accomplished other than to fund the military-industrial complex machine back here in the United States.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. Okay, our next take comes from the illustrious Michael Malice, who is quote retweeting Salon. Salon tweets, MAGA and Christian nationalism, bigger threat to America than Hamas could ever be. And Michael Malice quote tweets this, saying, neither Christian nationalism nor Islamic terrorism is as big of a threat to America as the corporate press. All right, let's hear it.
That is it's a great take. I actually don't. I don't have the biggest issue with Salon's take because it, like, just pretend it's not MAGA or Christian nationalism. Just say like things that happen here at home are a bigger threat than Hamas, which is on the other side of the world to the United States. That's at least we're moving in the right direction, right? Like we're caring about things here. I don't think MAGA and Christian nationalism are that big of threats. I think most of the it's always drummed up like the equivalent of the Dungeons and Dragons scare. For suburban moms, years ago, it's the same kind of boogeyman deal. But at least they're like saying like, hey, stuff at home matters more than stuff halfway across the world. Michael Malice does a great job. He just sidesteps it and gives a nice little check left hook and is like, yeah, but that might be true. But, the American corporate press is actually way worse, than any of these things. And it really is true because the American corporate press determines like what the Overton window is, what is acceptable to talk about, what opinions you are allowed to have. And I remember listening to Dave Smith's podcast, he was talking about Noam Chomsky, saying that like, hey, like, people that are warmongers and like, why is there a reason that people that get hired in media skew a very specific way? They're usually very pro-war. They're warmongers. They're usually pretty left and progressive. And the person he was talking with was like, well, I got this job. Are you saying that I only got this because I'm a leftist and I support this war or that? And Noam Chomsky was like, no, like I'm saying you would not be able to get this job if you weren't those things. And that's really true. The American corporate press is the propaganda arm of the elites. And just because like there might be good-hearted or people that do actually hold those views, it doesn't mean that it's not been perverted one way or the other. And it only serves to be like I've been watching the Lord of the Rings extended versions. And in Return of the King, there's the mouth of Sauron who just comes out to like speak ill and awful things. The American corporate press is the mouth of Sauron. Like they are not necessarily the big bad of the entire thing, but they speak for them, and that makes them almost as bad.
Yeah, I the funny thing to me is that the more you look on the official capacity, when you look at things like the war apologies and things, it's very easy to see this. But to me, the cracks have been showing in pop culture too, because of the bizarre obsession the media has with selling a story, spinning a narrative, and trying to destroy people for a multitude of reasons. But before I get into that, because I do want to say, I will say this: the Salon take is really stupid because MAGA and Christian nationalism. Yeah, your point is well taken in that Hamas is abroad and foreign and things like that. But when you just compare the ideologies of them, they are nowhere near the same. I mean, at worst, what you're going to say, oh, Christian nationalism is going to, throw gays in prison. And it's like, okay, well, really bad news for you on what Hamas is going to do to the gays. Just saying. So I think that you're right in a literal sense. And in the best possible interpretation of the Salon article, I think you're correct. I don't give Salon that credit though, because they're Salon. I think, and I think the headline is meant to beg a question where they can retreat into the actually that's because this is here and that's abroad. When the evocative comparison is to say Christian nationalism and Hamas ideologies are both dangerous. In fact, this one's more dangerous. So I just want to clarify that. I think it's a stupid bait that they're pulling, and I think that's one of the reasons Michael Malice highlights this.
Yeah.
But the other examples I wanted to bring up, the first was kind of, well, both of these have been big news. And the first one was with, I don't know if you heard about this or looked into it, but with the whole story on Dave Portnoy and what was going on there. And so for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to give like the 5-minute version of, apologies for butchering any of the details. But essentially, Dave Portnoy, the guy who owns Barstool Sports and, a lot of like sort of pop culture content, he goes around and does a lot of just like pizza reviews of mom and dad pizza shop places. And so he was putting on a massive charity event, and this journalist took it upon themselves, I don't remember which outlet it was from, to start messaging all of the sponsors of the charity event saying, hey, we're doing this write-up on Dave Portnoy, who's made these homophobic and sexist remarks in the past, and basically trying to destroy his character, trying to put him on blast and get his sponsors to either, one, have to defend that, or two, like, whoa, we don't want to be associated with that, and pull it out for a charity event. So then Dave Portnoy, of course, calls them out because one of the people messaged him like, hey, by the way, I just got this. And he calls them out like, why didn't you interview me? It sounds like you made up your mind about me already without even talking to me and all these things. I mean, I highly recommend anyone go and listen, because Dave Portnoy recorded the call he did and just obliterates this insane journalist. So that to me is one of the areas where it's like they got overzealous, and Dave Portnoy had the savvy to hold them accountable by being transparent and recording the whole thing and exposing them. And so that's one area where it's like, oh yeah, the media isn't even trying to tell noble lies about big picture things they think matter. Like, for instance, we had to lie about WMDs for the good of the nation or whatever, which is obviously bullcrap. But they're doing it to destroy people. And the other one that I found very fascinating, and this one's a little bit newer, and so I don't know if you've looked into this, but there was recently a big article published on Hassan Minhaj, I think was his last name. I could be mistaking that. He is a comedian guy who seemed like he might have been in line for the job of the late night show that Trevor Noah recently left. He is lefty, and his whole comedy bits, a lot of the ways, talk about his experience of being a minority in America and criticizing the police system. So he's generally kind of a lefty type dude. So this article comes out, and it starts putting him on blast for lying in his stories and for exaggerating stories in his stand-up and lying about events that didn't actually happen, or exaggerating them to ridiculous points. And in the article, they quote him as saying something like, the emotional truths are more important than the actual truth. And so when you hear that, my personal bias is, oh my goodness, look at this guy. He's stretching the truth a bit. And then he came out with a response video, and he had the receipts. He also recorded the interview that they did with him so he could give full context. And so, he starts off by apologizing, like, hey, if my, the way I changed some of these stories actually offended someone, I do want to apologize that, because the point that I'm drawing when I change some of these stories around is to highlight that like racism in these ways is a problem, not to minimize them or whatever. But when he talks about the stories that he quote unquote fabricated, it's things like, for instance, oh, well, when I went to my prom date's house, the mom didn't tell me there that she didn't want her daughter going with a guy of color. She actually had said it the day before. But for the narrative flow of the comedy bit to work, I wanted to bring people in the moment there when I was at the house, because that feeling had already existed. Or things like, my wife didn't exactly say these kinds of things, but someone else nearby did. But I wanted the story to wrap in. It's all these like things that every comedian does for every story ever in order to make their story work. And then the kicker is that when he's the quote about emotional truths, the full context is he says something like, I take my job seriously. When I'm reporting on like my show or reporting current events and news, I do it with humor, but the factual information comes first, and then I put a humorous spin on it. When I'm doing my late night stand-up, the emotional truths come first, and then the facts follow that in order to tell a story. And in context, that makes a ton of sense. But the article was meant to destroy him, and maybe he'll lose out on what could be his like dream job, a really big. Again, I don't love the guy. I don't really think. I think we probably disagree on a ton of things. But this article was so deceptive, and to me, the fact that he's able to show the receipts, I hope it gets enough views and people see that it does not matter You can swear your allegiance to the machine and the left. If they want to try to destroy you, they will do that because they are dishonest brokers.
Yeah.
Okay, our last take comes from a guy named Glenn S., independent conservative. He responds with an irrelevant fact to a tweet Thomas Massie made, basically about voting against war with Iran. So God bless Thomas Massie. And Glenn tweets, "That's 2-0. You have voted for protecting Dems." And then he links to an image of a vote roll with a tweet saying, "Once again, Thomas Massie protects the Democrats. First Schiff, now Tlaib, a disgrace." This is in that there were 2 motions to basically censure Democrats for different things they did. Adam Schiff was earlier. It also would have, that one would have like made him like personally financially liable for a lot of things, which would have set a really bad precedent on targeting individual people for their stands in Congress, even if you don't like them. And then this latest one would be to censure Rashida Tlaib because of her protest at the U.S. Capitol. That happened. It was a protest with for Palestine, Israel. They prefer Palestine. So Thomas Massie responds to him saying, "This makes twice that I have voted not to call protesters at the Capitol insurrectionists." And then he shows text from each of those motions that would have referred to the people who protested on the Capitol as insurrectionists, saying that the reason I voted against them is because I don't want to set the precedent that peaceful protests are insurrection. Then Glenn S. responds saying, "Massie goes after me because he voted against the word insurrectionists. Yet he has done absolutely nothing for the January 6th political prisoners that sit in jail today for the conviction of being insurrectionist. His hypocrisy is astounding." What do you make of that? Now, anyone who's watching visually sees the top of these images says "shot." I'm going to save the chaser because it's very funny. I thought we'd just actually analyze this as is because I threw this on before I saw the follow-up. And then once I saw the follow-up, I laughed and like, I have to add this too.
Yeah.
But this to me is enough to go on.
You know, the entire like mechanism in Washington, D.C. is like the role that they do is to create bills that have certain types of wording so that they can like goad or dissuade people or Congress people from voting for them so that they can use it as a hammer to beat them with later. And so like Thomas Massie's amazing because he's got principles that are really strongly held and he chooses to see through all of the, you know, the bull that that goes on in these bills. So just because you name something the Patriot Act or Keep America Safe Act or the CARES Act or whatever, he's like, well, I'm actually going to look at what the implications of us passing is. What is the actual side effects that occur when we pass these bills? And he always does a pretty good job when he's called out on it, on something that you would think like, oh man, that's kind of weird that he voted for that, like providing the receipts for why he did that. And as he usually does, he did it again here. And he also simultaneously exposed that like, oh yeah, this Glenn S. guy and these other folks that are criticizing him, they're no better than the Democrats. What they seek to do is to use the hand of the government to destroy the opponents that they don't like, regardless of whether their opponents have done something right or wrong. And it's just kind of astounding to me that this guy, Glenn S., posts this saying like, hey, it's awful that you protected the Dems, but also like, you know, like how awful that the January 6th political prisoners are sitting in jail. It's like, if what had been done to the January 6th political prisoners had been done to Rashida Tlaib or any of the other people that had peacefully protested on the other side, it would be just as wrong as what's being currently done to the January 6th protesters. But these people don't actually have conviction. They have my team and your team, and I'm going to use whatever type of bat I can get in my hands to hammer your team over the head.
That's exactly right. The other thing I want to highlight, I think that you covered that principle argument fully. So I'm going to focus on the fact of the sort of the linguistic trickery that Glenn S. engages with in his follow-up, where he says, Massie goes after me because he voted against the word insurrectionist. First of all, you started by nagging Massie. So him saying, oh, he's going after me. It's like, you're the one who provoked someone. You don't get to cry, oh, he's going after me. That's the wording there, right there is deceptive to begin with. Second, he says, yet he has done absolutely nothing for the January 6th political prisoners. He's a hypocrite. No, he's not a hypocrite. Because it'd be like me saying, for instance, or like if I refused to push children on the side of the road, I refused to push them over in order to make way for I don't know, Donald Trump walking by, right? It's like, look at him. He refused to help make way for Donald Trump to walk through. And I'm like, I refused to make way because I didn't want to push children. And then he goes, oh, wow. So you didn't want to push the children over, and yet you didn't donate all your money to help them afford lunch. You hypocrite. And it's like, no, you can take an action for a principled reason, and you are justified in doing that, even if you don't go further than the original thing. Now, would it be nice if Thomas Massie was able to do other things for insurrectionists? Sure. But it is a justified response to say, I will not vote affirmatively to do a bad thing to these protesters. Thomas Massie doesn't have to do anything beyond protecting them from the title insurrectionist. He's not obligated to do more to be ideologically consistent. Yeah. He's not a hypocrite. What would be a hypocrite is if he said, oh, Glenn, you want to make all these people insurrectionists and you are doing nothing to help them. If Thomas Massie made the burden of actively helping the protesters on Glenn, then he might have a point. Glenn might have a point to say he's a hypocrite, but he's not. He's just saying, oh, you're not doing enough. He shifts the goalpost in this conversation to say, it's not enough for you to not actively do something that would harm them. You have to proactively be helping them in order for you to be justified here, and makes no mention of that, of the fact that Massie voted against things that would have actively harmed them. So it's a bad faith argument. It shifts the goalposts, and it's completely deceptive. It's the sign of someone losing an argument and retreating, shifting the goalpost along the way. Here's the chaser. Someone asks him, Glenn S., what has Trump done for the January 6ers in jail today? Because Glenn S. is a Trump guy. And Glenn S. responds, Trump derangement syndrome is real. That's all he says. That is it. So he says, Thomas Massie, you voted against using the word insurrectionist for these people, but you didn't do enough. And so then this other person says, okay, but what did Trump do? Oh, wow, you're just Trump derangement syndrome. Doesn't even answer them because Trump did nothing. Arguably, the worst single person who could have done the most did nothing, and was obligated to do the most, to be clear, because they were there for him.
Yeah, I don't have any more to add on that. It's a good chaser.
Just oh my gosh, it's so savory.
He must be a bot. He must be like just a provocateur bot, or no, I'm not saying like a bot, like an automated bot, but like in the same way that what's it? Mitt Romney had the Pierre Delecto fake account, yeah. Like someone like that. That's like this is their hidden take it out on people account. Must be something like that.
It's
Glenn S is really Patch Eye McCain.
I was trying to think of what was Anthony. I mean, this is a little different. Carlos Danger, Anthony Weiner's alternate. Carlos Danger. That name always cracks me up the most.
That's pretty funny.
Was a little bit different than some of these other ones, but yeah. All right. Well, that's what we got for you today. Thanks so much for listening. Again, if you enjoyed this, make sure to leave a comment or a like. And if you have any takes you want us to review, you think we're out of line here, shoot off in the comments or send us the messages with the takes. We'd love to review them. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.